and the English-speaking Caribbean or Americas to go into the French Antilles, as the Atlantic slave trade was not a linear affair between Anglophone Africa and Anglophone New World, but also it bridged into the French West Indies.
Okay.
And that is what Ghana diaspora and the historical linkages with the French Antilles was.
Now, when we have colloquiums like this, when we come together like this, when we preach these things, like you have on your poster is a historic linkage between Ghana and the French Antilles and all that. At the end of the day, for somebody who's watching, for somebody who's listening, we hear these things almost every time. What do we achieve?
Thank you very much. That's a very, very good question. Well, this was actually the beginning of a series of events that would happen next year.
Okay.
As you're quite aware of, 2019 would mark 400 years of the enslavement of people of African descent, the documented enslavement of people of African descent, and it's going to be the year of return. That is why our poster indicated the door of return. Precisely.
Okay.
And this colloquium is a stepping stone to what would happen next year to sort of encourage people from the French diaspora or the French Antilles to come over to Ghana, visit our historical monuments, i.e. Elmina Castle, Cape Coast Castle, Fort Amsterdam, and other forts and castles that were linked to, unfortunately, the sad event of the Atlantic slave trade, and also to commemorate this history. And rather than looking at it from a victim perspective, look at it as an empowerment, as a people of resilience.
So now, looking at it as a people of resilience, as empowerment, when we take these individuals through these kind of programs, okay, at the end of the day, not us that we are here, but for they that are going to be part of that experience come next year, what runs through their minds, and then what is in them, what's in it for them? Because, and at the end of the day as well, what do we over here derive from, let's say, the French Antilles diaspora? What are we going to derive from them as well?
Well, it's interesting you indicate what would we derive from it and what would they also derive from it. I think it's an interesting perspective to look at it that the history of the Atlantic slave trade was a very traumatic history, and therefore the door of return, or the year of return, is to help our brothers and sisters who are in the diaspora to also link to the motherland. What is the motherland? A motherland where a lot of their ancestors were taken away into the New World, and to help them heal that pain. It could be physical, it could be imaginary, but to let them know that there is a homeland somewhere in Africa. Okay. It could be a physical return, because these returns that we're going to have next year, a year of return, could also entice some of our brothers and sisters in the French Antilles or in other parts of the Caribbean or Americas to return home. They could return to their motherland on a permanent basis or on a temporary basis. Okay. They could also return as a form of a pilgrimage. If you remember, the late Jacob H.B. Lamte came up with the Joseph Project, and the Joseph Project was to make Ghana a home of pilgrimage for the Atlantic diaspora to return. So this could be what would be in there for them. And what would be in for us as Ghanaians is also to recognize this history, that something happened, and therefore we also have to understand that perhaps, it's about time that we recognize that we had other parts of our own people living abroad who went through this traumatic history. And also perhaps for Ghana, it could also be an avenue to open up a form of heritage tourism that could bring a bit of development into certain local areas. But I must admit that would sound a bit more of trying to make money out of a traumatic history. So we would have to be very, very
play down on that.
Precisely, because we are looking at a traumatic history and not about, making gains from it.
Okay. Now, Jamila, the slave trade was not only Ghana, there were other African countries. I mean, it was so severe in some other African countries as well, and even Ghana in the northern area. Okay. Now, this you're doing, are we having a replica of that in other African countries, or this is a Ghanaian thing we're doing?
Thank you so much. This is a very, very interesting question, because It is a historical linkages between Ghana and the French Antilles, and the difference is what? Ghana is an Anglophone-speaking country. French Antilles is French, and as you quite rightly mentioned, the Atlantic slave trade had roots, and the roots went through Ghana, the Elmina, Cape Coast, Salaga also, and through the routes in Gorée in Senegal, Cabinda in Angola, Ouéda in Benin, and this is to bridge that gap, so that, you know, there is a slave route, Atlantic slave route commemoration that might go through Ghana, through Benin, through Nigeria, and also perhaps through the East Coast towards Angola. But what is interesting is that during our colloquium last week, we had a colleague from the University of Cape Coast who spoke about the notion of returns, the returnees from Brazil, the Tabon group.
The Tabon. If you go to Jamestown, we have the Tabon house.
Absolutely. And this was to bridge that gap of just being Ghana, but also the linkages between West Africa and Brazil. Because if you look at the coast of West Africa, we had some returnees who came from Brazil into Benin, Togo, Nigeria, and Ghana. So really, Ghana in the diaspora and its historical linkages with the French Antilles is not just limited to the Ghanaian experience, but also limited to other parts of Africa. So yes, we include the Brazilian, Afro-Brazilians, Afro-Cubans, and also the English-speaking diaspora.
Okay. Now, let me ask you a question in the reverse. We have the diaspora, like you have the French Antilles and all that coming next year and all that. Have we ever, those of you in this drive, in this movement for diaspora linkages and all that, within our purview, our parameters, have we ever tried to trace the roots from country to country, from here to here, to wherever they finally got themselves? Have we done a thing like that? Have we traced these things before?
There's been quite a lot of academic work that has been done around that, but
there's theory.
Well, I'll say practice. You know, one of our very good colleagues, Professor Henry Lewigate, had a program trying to trace the Atlantic route, both from Ghana to Benin, into Nigeria to Gambia. And yes, what is interesting in these Atlantic slave route tracing is that there is an issue of sustainability, because it's one thing to organize a program, to have a television program and other programs about it, but it's another thing to have it being sustained on a long term. And how do you sustain that? It is to organize regular visits and educate both people in Africa and also people in the Antilles or in the Caribbean to understand that yes, these linkages exist. And how do they exist? They exist through religious practices. If you look at the religious practices of Orisha in Trinidad and Tobago, it's a Nigerian Yoruba gods that they practice. If you take the practices of candomblé in Brazil, it is also a form of an African religion that is being practiced. If you take the practice of Santeria in Cuba, it's also an Afro-Caribbean religion linked to Africa. So the linkages are quite evident through empirical analysis.
So Ghana in the diaspora, as your organization, what you do, you face some challenges?
Well, challenges are always faced when you're organizing.
What are some of your difficulties?
Well, I must admit that I'm actually a university lecturer in France, and my specialized field is on diaspora studies and also a policy analyst. So therefore, organizing, bringing both academia, public, civil servants, and the public together is not always that easy. So the challenges was galvanizing and having enough people to attend it. But, you know, we did manage to, you know, have a good turnout, which was good for the program, for the French Embassy, and also for the Institut Français, Alliance Française. But this is a drive by the French Institute and the Embassy to get Ghana into the diaspora from a French Caribbean perspective, and also to have some kind of developmental project behind that after the colloquium.
All right, Jomla, you're doing a very good job. It's a good thing you're doing to link the diaspora to Ghana, and for us, we're very proud of what you're doing. Give us your final words. What should we expect next year, and maybe in the near future, what should we expect from you? And then when you do these projects, at the end of the day, since you're a lecturer, are you going to come up with some documents for us to read, and we need to read and learn and increase our knowledge in this?
Absolutely. Now, the sustainability aspect of this program and also this project is to have a publication with various colleagues from the University of Ghana, from the University of Cape Coast, the University of French Antilles, and the University of Bordeaux, Sciences Po Bordeaux, where I'm based. So the sustainability aspect is to have a concrete work and also organize other forums. For example, in December, there will be a group from the French Antilles who will be in Ghana to visit the historical monuments and to prepare for next year's event. So yes, we are hoping that this would just open new avenues for Ghanaians to know where is Martinique. We're talking about the French Antilles. The French Antilles composed of Martinique and Guadeloupe, and they are still part of France. They are France's overseas territories with a huge percentage of people of African descent, and also a kind of a Creole identity that has been formed there with the linkages with Africa and notably Ghana.
Okay. All right. That's been very insightful, and wish you all the best in your endeavors, and we look forward to 2019 for this to happen. Any final word?
I'm fine.
Okay, all right. So we've been talking to Jamila Hamidou. She is coordinator for the Ghana and the diaspora, and come next year, something big is going to happen. Let's all bite into this. It's all about history. It's all about events. It's all about things that make us as a people. And all right, so that's how far time has taken us. I want to say happy birthday to Rita Ndebugri of Meron Capital at Kitase near Eburi from Mary Diaba of Ghana Armed Forces. Coming up next, we have the accounts